Devastation. There is no word strong enough to describe the storm of destruction that came through New England in September of 1938. The 1938 hurricane is and was one of the worst disasters in North American history. Just a few short hours, nearly 700 people were killed, over 4,500 were injured, and more than 75,000 buildings were destroyed. There was little to no warning about this hurricane. No one was prepared for what might happen. The idea of a hurricane coming through New England was crazy. Many people believed that, in fact, their barometers were broken because of the abnormally low readings. New England had no procedures for dealing with a hurricane. Nobody knew how to handle it. The hurricane followed a rather uniform path, that is, until it reached the West Indies, where it took a sudden and strange turn up and headed straight for New England. While Northborough did not get hit as hard as places like Providence, the town did not get out unscathed. There was one death, that being of a man from Springfield, and many houses and businesses were damaged. In addition, some of the churches in town had their roofs damaged and steeples were loosened or were literally ripped off. I was privileged enough to speak with Miss Betty Tatro, who shared her experiences with me for the making of this film.
Oh, the hurricane. That was pretty exciting. I never heard the word hurricane until that day. It had been raining for about 4 days previous, so the ground was saturated with water. And so then the day of the hurricane, it was Wednesday. Why I remember it being Wednesday, I have no idea. And ordinarily, the school bus driver was supposed to drop me off right in front of my house. But that day, he thought it might do me good to get a little wet, you know. And by the time the school bus was bringing me home, it was pouring. And the rain was hitting my face, you know. The wind was a little gusty at 3:30 or so. And so the rain was hitting my face like little BB pellets, you might say. And trees were twisting around with the rain. But I made it. It was only about a mile. And after I got home, it started getting windier and windier. Now, I was at junior high at the time and went to school down at Woodside. Because the high school burnt in the spring of 1938, the high school kids were going to school double sessions in Marlborough. I was junior high, what you call middle school these days. And so I was, they had the 7th and 8th graders were going to school down Hudson Street. And it was a 2-room wooden school. So the school bus driver, as I say before, he dropped me off about a mile from home, and I made it home, all right. It was pretty windy by the time I got home. And we just thought at first, you know, a windstorm. But then as it got windier and windier, those gusts of wind were unimaginable. Our house at the foot of Ball Hill, which is now 218 Green Street. They've changed the numbers. At the time it was 69 Green Street. And that's the house that John Shunder was brought up in. And that's where I lived before the Shunders bought it. My father built that house in 1933. So I'm glad he built a good solid house, because it stayed put during that hurricane. But we had these huge sugar maple trees all around the house. We used to make our own maple sugar. And they were fully as big as that, every one of them. And 5 out of 7 trees were uprooted, just about the same as that, with all the roots sticking up in the air. Now, nothing hit the house or hit the barn. They went right in between. They went between the chicken house and the house. Nothing hit our buildings. I don't know. For some unknown reason, our buildings were all safe, even with those huge trees coming down. So, that's my main recollection. As the wind got worse and worse. It lasted from about 4, from 6:30, 7. And, you know, quite a few hours that wind was gusting. And the trees would bend like this, and then they'd straighten up. Then another gust, and they'd bend over, and they'd straighten up. And then the roots would come up, and it'd be down, and with quite a bit of noise. And when my mother and father and myself realized, the trauma, how horrible this storm was. And then wondered just how safe the high school kids were. I had two sisters in Marlborough High School. As I say, they were Northborough High School kids going double sessions in Marlborough High School. So nobody knew. There was no communication. Nobody knew if they were safe, if the building had gone down, if the school bus had taken them and gotten crushed or crashed on the way home. Nobody knew anything. We didn't know till the next morning whether my two sisters were safe or not. They did get back to Northborough Center about midnight and had to stay in friends' houses in the center of town. And I can remember my folks saying, just stay away from the windows. The trees could be breaking the windows. And so we had to stay sort of to the center of the house, even though it was fascinating to watch the trees bending almost to the ground, come up and, 2-3 times, and then they were down. And it was quite a thing to see all these huge trees coming down all around the house. Broke my heart that I wasn't downtown right, first thing in the morning like my two sisters. And it was pretty hard to go anywhere. You had to climb up and over some branches and up and over trees. And, well, my folks finally let me go downtown and look it over. Now, one thing that we thought was quite exciting, but it's sort of gruesome, there were trees in the old cemetery. The old cemetery is right behind Unitarian Church, where there's those blackish gravestones. And trees had grown since people were buried there. So the roots of trees were in amongst the caskets. So as those trees toppled over, what do you suppose happened to the caskets? Yeah, the caskets came up. So there were skulls rolling around in the cemetery, and there were bones that were visible. There were various bodies that came up in the hurricane. So, and then of course there was a death on Main Street, which isn't too pleasant. These were not Northborough people. They were from Springfield. And they were just driving from Springfield to Boston, got this far and realized they couldn't drive any further. So they stopped in front of the library. See, the rain was so heavy that you couldn't see. And your windshield wipers couldn't go fast enough so you couldn't see. So even before trees started coming down, they pulled over at the side of the road right in front of the library here in town. And a tree came down across their car. And took 8 hours to extricate those people from the car, because by that time the driver had bled to death. And the two in the back seat just sat there and while their driver bled to death. And there was no jaws of life. There was no chainsaws. There were no electric saws, no gas-powered saws, nothing like that. Do you know what a crosscut saw is? It's a great big long saw with a handle on each end. You get a man on each end, and they saw back and forth, back and forth. There were 8 hours getting that big tree off this car.
Wow.
Yeah, wow is right. That was, quite a tragedy. And then, of course, you come downtown, and there are big trees all the way down Main Street. We're just laying down, all in the same direction. And steeples on the ground. Baptist Church, which is where we are right now, that steeple was on the front lawn. The town was a mess, to put it bluntly. And they didn't fix it up right away the way they would these days. These days you'd hear the humming of a gas-powered chainsaw, it'd be all fixed in, a matter of hours. But it took days to clean things up. WPA helped my folks. And my father was the only man on the farm, and you need 2 men for a crosscut saw. So it would have been a little difficult for him. He could have done it. He did a lot of things. But the WPA is what Franklin Delano Roosevelt started. Franklin Delano Roosevelt got the WPA going when he was president, and that was, we had been in a depression, and people were out of work, and they stood in a bread line just to get food. Not much more than bread, oftentimes. There wasn't food even. And he got the country going and got men working, and they worked for wages, maybe all of $5 a week. And they were sent out on projects. And after the hurricane, that was a project, clean up the town. As a matter of fact, we had maybe acre was all pine trees. And they had almost all come down. All the big ones came down. The little skinny ones popped up again. WPA got in there and cleaned it all out. And that was all hauled away for lumber. And so it was something that, one man alone couldn't have handled. So if it wasn't for WPA, it would have taken a lot longer to gather up enough men to clean up the town. I can't remember not going, I think only a day or two. Oh, we were not sissies. You could go to school if there were trees down. It's not like these days. You go to school for next to nothing. Yeah, I don't remember being out for more than, I remember, maybe we were out the rest of the week, Thursday and Friday. Maybe that's why it struck me that it happened on a Wednesday. Maybe the excitement of being off for 2 days. Yeah. So none of the schools were damaged. Our little Woodside school stood right up through it all. And Hudson Street School, that's where the young kids were everybody telling about, oh, you should see my house, you should see the trees that were down. It was excitement. And I can't remember anything sad. It was more exciting, to be able to, one-upsmanship. Oh, we had 5 trees down. Oh, so the one that only had 4 trees down around their house, they didn't think it was so bad after all. So, because some had houses damaged. Here on School Street, there was a roof that came off one of these brick houses. And, as I say, we were very fortunate not to have any damage. Our barn was, let's say, 200 years old or better. There were no nails in the main part of the barn. It was all put together with wooden pegs. And yet that did not come down in the hurricane, which is good. But, a lot of that is because it was so open. The big barn door was, had cracks and holes in it, so the wind was going through. And that could be why the barn didn't go down. If it was solid and all the doors shut tight, it could have toppled right over. Yeah. Because there were houses that did go down. Now, there were some folks. The young man, Elmer Warren, used to work in the summer for my father as a hired man. He was maybe 18, 19 years old. And there was he and his 2 sisters, his mother and father, lived out in a little house. It was Green Street, but over the line into Boylston. And they had never heard of a hurricane before. They went out. They had a little teeny tiny house that was sort of not too well put together. And they went out and they stood there, a horse on one side and the cow on the other side, and the family, all 5 of them, crouched on the ground between the 2 animals. And they stayed there for the 4 hours. And when the wind died down, they went back. They were so pleased that their house was still there. So, of course, as soon as we could go up Ball Hill, my mother was worried about them because of the structure of that little house. And that was one reaction. We were so pleased that they were okay. And because their house wasn't, it was a shack, to put it bluntly. And so it was good to know that they made it, all of them made it okay.